Hey everyone. It's March 9th, and that means we're celebrating the anniversary of a pretty influential book.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Adam Smith's The Wealth of Nations.
Oh, wow.
It was published way back in 1776, and it's considered like the first modern economics book. So
hmm
today we'll be taking a deep dive into some of the key ideas from The Wealth of Nations.
Yeah, it's amazing how relevant Smith's observations still are, even in our vastly different world.
Right. Like, take his example of the pin factory.
Yeah.
So Smith describes how one person alone making pins, they might struggle to produce maybe like 10 a day at most.
Uh-huh.
But when you break down the pin making process into all these specialized tasks, like drawing the wire, straightening, cutting, sharpening, and so on,
Yeah.
then you have a whole team of workers, and they each focus on just one task, right? And suddenly the factory's output just skyrockets, like thousands of pins per worker.
It's incredible.
Yeah, pretty incredible.
That's the beauty of the division of labor.
Right.
And Smith argued that this specialization, it wasn't like something that was planned, from the top down. It actually arose organically from our natural human tendency to trade.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, we naturally gravitate towards what we're good at, and then we exchange those specialized goods or services with others for the things we need.
So it's almost like a natural evolution towards efficiency,
Yeah,
driven by self-interest.
exactly. That's a great way to put it. And that's where the concept of the invisible hand comes in.
Yeah.
Smith argued that when each of us pursues our own gain, we often end up unintentionally benefiting society as a whole. It's as if an unseen force is kind of guiding the market towards greater efficiency and productivity.
Okay, so we're all working hard, we're specializing, we're trading like crazy, but how do we even keep track of all this exchange? Like, what makes something more valuable than another?
That's a great question.
Yeah.
Smith tackles these ideas head on. He focuses on what he calls exchange value,
Okay.
essentially what you can trade something for. And he argues that labor is the ultimate source of a good's value.
Okay.
He called this the natural price of a thing.
So the more labor that goes into creating something, the more valuable it inherently is.
That was his core argument, and it influenced economic thought for a really long time.
Wow.
Later economists added more nuance and, additional factors to the equation.
Sure.
But Smith's focus on labor as this key driver of value was groundbreaking.
But it's not just labor, is it? Like,
Yeah.
what about the raw materials, the tools, the land, all that goes into it too, right?
You're absolutely right.
Yeah.
And that leads us to Smith's concept of the three factors of production:
Okay.
land, labor, and capital.
Got it.
These are like the essential ingredients you need for any economic activity.
Yeah. Right.
And the payments made to each factor, rent for the land, wages for labor, and profit for the capital, they all contribute to that final price we see for goods and services.
I see. So you need the land to produce raw materials.
Right.
Then you need workers to transform those materials.
Yeah.
And then you need tools and equipments, the capital, to make it all happen efficiently.
Precisely. It's a system, an interconnected web of resources, effort, and tools.
Cool.
And according to Smith, competition plays a crucial role in this whole system.
Okay. How so?
Well, competition between buyers and sellers is what helps to keep prices in check, and it drives everyone to improve their products and services.
So in a way, competition is like the fuel that keeps the engine of the economy running smoothly.
I like that analogy.
Thanks.
And ideally, this competition leads to what Smith called the natural price,
Uh-huh.
which reflects the true cost of production, including a fair return for all three of those factors of production.
Okay, but things aren't always ideal.
Right.
What happens when one seller just gains way too much control, like in a monopoly?
You've hit on one of the potential pitfalls that Smith recognized.
Okay.
Monopolies, they can distort the market,
Right.
allowing a single seller to manipulate prices and stifle innovation. Smith was wary of this kind of concentrated power.
This makes me think about the role of government then.
Yeah.
So was Smith like a proponent of completely hands-off, let the market run wild kind of approach?
Not exactly.
Okay.
While he championed individual economic freedom, he did recognize that government had an important role to play.
Interesting. So what did he see as like the legitimate functions of government?
Well, Smith believed that government has a responsibility to provide national defense, to establish a justice system, to enforce contracts and protect property rights, and to provide certain public works that benefit society as a whole.
Okay.
Things like roads and education. Those are things that are difficult for the private sector to handle effectively on its own.
So it's less about no government involvement and more about finding that right balance.
Yeah.
Ensuring that the government plays its essential roles but without stifling individual initiative and free markets.
You got it. And this brings us to another key idea that Smith explored the impact of government debt. He argued that excessive borrowing could burden future generations and stifle economic growth.
Wow. It's fascinating to see how this concern still resonates today,
Yeah.
as debates over government spending and debt continue to shape economic policies worldwide.
Absolutely.
It's amazing how many of these ideas from the 1700s are still so relevant today.
Yeah, it really is remarkable.
It makes you wonder what else Smith might have to say about our modern economic landscape.
You're absolutely right. And we'll delve into some of those broader implications and connections in part 2 of our deep dive.
Awesome. Can't wait.
Stay tuned. So welcome back.
It's pretty wild to think about the historical context of The Wealth of Nations. Like, published in 1776.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, the same year the American colonies declared their independence.
Wow.
Smith's work was so deeply intertwined with the political and economic, upheavals of his time.
It's like the book itself was a declaration of economic independence.
Right.
Didn't Smith actually argue that the colonies were kind of a burden on England?
Yeah, he did.
Interesting.
Smith was a staunch critic of mercantilism,
Right.
which was like the dominant economic theory at the time.
Yeah.
And mercantilists believed that a nation's wealth was measured by its stockpiles of gold and silver.
Uh-huh.
And they advocated for all these policies like tariffs and monopolies to maximize exports and limit imports.
So basically, they were all about hoarding wealth and keeping it within their own borders.
Exactly. But Smith saw this as a losing strategy.
Yeah, he believed that those mercantilist policies ultimately just stifled economic growth and created all this unnecessary conflict between nations.
Makes sense.
He argued that free trade between nations, with each specializing in the goods and services they produced most efficiently, would lead to greater overall wealth for everyone.
So if everyone focuses on what they do best and then trades freely with each other, you're going to have a much more productive and prosperous global economy.
Precisely. Smith used a simple example of a tailor and a shoemaker to illustrate this point.
Okay.
It's far more efficient for the tailor to just focus on making clothes, and the shoemaker to focus on making shoes, and then they trade their goods with each other rather than for each of them to try and do both tasks themselves.
It's like that old saying, jack of all trades, master of none.
Yeah, you end up spreading yourself too thin and you don't excel at anything.
For sure.
And Smith applied the same logic to nations. He believed that they should specialize in producing the goods and services where they had an absolute advantage.
What do you mean?
Meaning they could produce those things more efficiently than other countries.
Okay, so instead of trying to be self-sufficient in everything, nations should embrace their unique strengths
Yeah,
and trade freely with others to meet their needs.
exactly.
It sounds like a much more collaborative and harmonious approach to global economics.
It is, and this leads us to Smith's vision of a system of natural liberty.
Okay.
He believed that individuals should be free to pursue their own economic interests with minimal government interference. He argued that this freedom, combined with the guiding force of the invisible hand, would lead to greater prosperity for everyone.
But even with this emphasis on individual liberty, Smith didn't advocate for a complete absence of government, did he?
No, he didn't.
Okay.
Smith recognized that there were certain roles for government that were essential for a functioning society and a healthy economy.
So what did he see as the legitimate functions of government?
Smith believed that government had a responsibility to provide for national defense, to establish a justice system, to enforce contracts and protect property rights, and to provide certain public works, like roads and education, things that would benefit society as a whole.
Okay.
These are things that are difficult for the private sector to handle effectively on its own.
So it's not about a complete separation of government and the economy. It's
Right.
more about finding the right balance,
Yeah.
ensuring that government plays its essential roles without stifling individual initiative and free markets.
Exactly. Smith was a pragmatist, not an ideologue.
Gotcha.
He recognized that markets aren't perfect, and that there are times when government intervention is necessary to correct market failures or to provide essential services.
This makes me think about the ongoing debates we see today about the role of government in the economy.
Yeah.
I wonder what Smith would make of these modern controversies.
It's an interesting question. While he was certainly skeptical of excessive government intervention, he also lived in a very different time.
Yeah.
Before the rise of huge corporations, global financial markets, and complex social safety nets.
It's hard to imagine what he'd make of the scale and complexity of our modern economy.
Oh, I know, right?
But his core principles of individual liberty, free markets, and limited government,
Yes.
they continue to be fiercely debated and applied often in ways that he might not have anticipated.
Absolutely. And that's where our deep dive continues in part 3.
Okay.
We'll explore some of these modern implications and consider how Smith's ideas might help us navigate the challenges and opportunities of our own economic landscape.
So welcome back to our deep dive into the wealth of nations. And it's fascinating to consider how Smith's ideas about government spending and debt are still so relevant even today.
Yeah.
He was really wary of excessive government borrowing, wasn't he?
He was.
It makes you wonder, would he even be against things like public education or infrastructure projects?
Well, it's more nuanced than that, I think.
Right.
What's interesting is that Smith actually distinguished between what he called productive and unproductive labor.
Okay.
And he argued that spending on things like education and infrastructure could actually be considered productive.
Oh, really?
Yeah, because it increases the overall capacity of the economy in the future.
So it's not just about how much the government spends, but what they spend it on.
Exactly. It's about investing in a better future, not just throwing money around.
Right. So it's like investing in a better future rather than just, like you said, throwing money around.
Exactly. Smith recognized that, investments in human capital, like education and training, were essential for long-term economic growth.
Yeah.
And he also understood the importance of public works like roads, bridges, canals, for facilitating trade and commerce. These things lay the groundwork for a thriving economy.
Yeah, it's almost like building a really strong foundation for a house.
Oh, I like that.
You can't just focus on decorating the rooms.
Right.
You need to make sure that the structure itself is sound.
That's a great analogy, and it brings us back to Smith's overarching vision of a prosperous and thriving society.
Oh, yeah.
He truly believed that a growing economy driven by free markets, individual liberty, and a well-defined role for government would ultimately create a rising tide that lifts all boats.
But even in a system of natural liberty, as he called it, Smith acknowledged that there would always be at least some level of inequality.
Of course.
Some people would inevitably be more successful than others.
Yeah, Smith understood that a market economy would naturally produce winners and losers, but he believed that a system based on individual freedom and opportunity would allow for social mobility.
Right, so those who were less fortunate could still have a chance to improve their lives through hard work and ingenuity.
Exactly. It's not about achieving perfect equality of outcome, but rather about ensuring that everyone has a fair shot at success.
Right, creating a system where people are rewarded for their contributions and where everyone has the potential to thrive.
That's it. And this concept of fairness, this understanding of the human element in economics, is really at the heart of Smith's moral philosophy.
Don't forget, he also wrote the theory of moral sentiments.
That's right.
Where he explored our capacity for empathy, compassion, and ethical behavior.
Exactly. And it's so interesting to think about how these two seemingly distinct works, one on economics and one on moral philosophy, they actually complement each other.
Right.
Smith recognized that a healthy economy needs more than just self-interest.
For sure.
It needs a foundation of ethical behavior, trust, and a sense of shared purpose.
Yeah, and that's what makes The Wealth of Nations such an enduring and influential book.
Absolutely.
It's not just some dry economic treatise.
No.
It's a work that grapples with fundamental questions about human nature, society, and the pursuit of a better life for all.
Well said.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into Adam Smith's world, what are some key takeaways for us today? What can we learn from this 18th century thinker as we navigate the complexities of our own modern economic landscape?
Well, Smith's insights offer us a really valuable framework for thinking about these huge questions. The role of government, the power of markets, the importance of individual initiative, and the need for a moral and ethical foundation for economic activity.
Yeah.
His work reminds us that economics isn't just about numbers and graphs, it's about people, their choices, and the constant quest for a more prosperous and just society.
It's amazing to think that a book written over 200 years ago can still provide us with such valuable insights
I know, it's incredible.
and spark such thought-provoking discussions. So thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the brilliant mind of Adam Smith.
It was my pleasure.
Until next time, keep exploring and keep questioning.